My name is Tracy Drain, and I'm an engineer working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and I work on a mission called Psyche, which is going to go visit a really special asteroid in our solar system. So this is an image of the asteroid belt, artist conception, and all of these asteroids in the belt are between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter. We know that there's about 840,189 asteroids there, and they estimate that there's about 1 to 2 million asteroids that are larger than a kilometer in diameter. So I'm going to tell you about one special asteroid called Psyche, which lives out near the outer edge of this asteroid belt. This is an artist's conception of what 16 Psyche might look like. We actually don't know what it looks like because from the Earth, you can get very little data about it. This is the largest metal asteroid, if it's metal, out there that we know of. So the scientists are wondering if it really is metal and if it really is that big. If it were perfectly spherical, it would have a diameter of about 226 kilometers, which is like a little bit bigger than the distance from Los Angeles to San Diego. Like, what forms something like that? And so we're putting together a spacecraft that has instruments on it that can measure the magnetic field, it can measure the composition of the surface, it can determine what the gravity is, it can take pictures of it, all of these things to help us really understand what Psyche is. This really cool thing is an image of the engine firing, which I love. It looks totally sci-fi to me. We're gonna launch in August 2022. We're gonna go into orbit around the asteroid and be there for about 21 months trying to learn all about it and understand whether the scientist hypothesis is correct. Is it not correct? If it's not, we're going to learn a whole lot more because we don't really know what would match the signatures that we're seeing if it's not that. So there you go. I think I left us some time for a question or two at the end.
I talk about Afrofuturism using gaming as a principal lens. When I arrived at the Institute for the Future, my topic for my dissertation, I noticed how white the future was and that it basically catered to an upper middle class view of the future too. My goal when I became a professor was to unpack what the Institute for the Future was doing to make the future more transparent for the rest of us, to democratize the future, and also to try to heal the trauma of 400 years of repression. So the idea is, how do we leverage gaming to heal trauma? The same regions where we think about the future and memory are in the same regions of our brain. What if we create alternative memories of the future that heal trauma? We took an existing forecasting game and we hacked up that game with a group of students of mine, predominantly female, predominantly students of color. And the first thing they do is they go to the mood card and they say, well, Beyonce's a mood, Kanye's a mood. It's crazy, but it's a mood. What they brought to it was their own vernacular of the Black experience and people of color. And so we created a game out of it called Afro Rhythms from the Future. Machine learning learns from games, right? So if we create games that have alternative visions of the future, maybe we can create what Brian Eno calls an artificial intelligence with soul.
Why do we care? Why do we care about phytoplankton? Since the Industrial Revolution, about 40% of the CO2 that we've put into the atmosphere via fossil fuel burnings and deforestation has ended up in the ocean, in part due to phytoplankton photosynthesizing. Every second breath you breathe was made in the ocean. So phytoplankton also produce oxygen. These tiny microscopic organisms have these big global scale impacts. But what my lab really does is lipidomics. What we do is we look at the diversity of the lipids that are there and we try to capture all of that diversity. And so phytoplankton, when they die, they start to produce these chemical signals that are made of lipids and it deters other grazers. So this chemical language is orchestrating this really beautiful dance between the microbial community in the ocean, and that has bigger biogeochemical impacts for the whole planet. The icing on the cake is that the same chemical language is being spoken in your bodies. Your immune system uses oxylipin whenever you get a wound or you battle a bacterial infection, and maybe that shouldn't be so surprising considering that life most likely evolved in the ocean.
Bethanie, your time is
but
up.
It's a really beautiful story and something I hope that we can touch on later in the discussion panel. So, thank you.
I'm Philip Butler. I'm the founder of the Seeker Project. Seeker is a distinctly Black artificial intelligence agent with mental health capacities. And so we built Seeker mainly because we recognize that people are talking to Siri and Alexa about their mental state, but we also know that Siri and Alexa really are incapable of handling these issues. So what we're attempting to do is center Black experiences, which become the foundation of these conversational components. And so how are we doing this? The Seeker Project has pretty much a team of clinicians to help us make sure that this thing that we're doing that's essentially giving us the capacity to be clinically sound but not be clinically sounding, because given the stigma within the Black community around the idea of mental health, we really want to be able to have these conversations in a way that don't sound clinical. And so we're essentially with this idea, we give kind of barbershop wisdom in a way that's backed by these kind of time-tested techniques, right? And so in this way, we think that Seeker can not only become the future, but it become the basis of the way in which we think about conversational artificial intelligence agents and the way in which they function with other people.
At the Pentagon, I did technology horizon scanning for the Undersecretary for Acquisition, and we were looking at disruptive technologies to maintain U.S. technological superiority. And we found, not surprisingly, that industry is moving faster than the government. To what we call impedance match that rate of innovation, we established a defense innovation unit up in Silicon Valley. What we found was that AI and autonomy would greatly enhance U.S. capabilities in the form of being able to react at machine speed. We looked at drones, swarms, a concept called man-machine teaming. When we briefed that, however, they said, yeah, this technology is very compelling, interesting, but we will never use this unless you can tell us what it's doing, why it's doing it, and how it's going to carry out my commander's intent. We had to take a step back and said, what's the real question we should be asking is, how do you build trust into AI systems? And so one of the things we're looking at RAND is what we call an algorithmic Bill of Rights.
As Ahmed was saying, there's an aspect of looking back and looking forward, and one of the things I'm going to tell you about is looking up into the sky, right? Because we've been doing this for our entire history, I would say, as a species. And looking up, we've seen all sorts of amazing things. We've seen other planets. We've seen planets a lot like Earth, very different from Earth, all kinds of things. Stars that are a lot like our sun, very different from the sun. We've begun to understand how vast and amazing and diverse the universe is. But one thing I think that is probably the most mysterious thing that we've ever encountered is a black hole. A black hole is an extreme thing. It's extreme gravity, right? The idea that I'm sure you all know is that, for example, a star runs out of fuel. If it's large enough, its burning eventually stops. It runs out of fuel. Its burning holds it up at a certain size. When it stops burning, you have all of this matter that collapses under its own gravity. And if the star is large enough, there's no force we know of in the universe that will stop it from collapsing and collapsing, and that gravity getting stronger and stronger and stronger to the point is that there'd be no way of escaping from it. There's no rocket you could design that would get you off that object. If you think about it, it's really profound. It's really the end of space and time that really exists in our universe, because black holes we now know are real. In the following sense, practically, if you're journeying towards a black hole, you go past that point of return, you'll never be able to re-emerge to tell the rest of the universe what happened. So for all practical purposes, that is the end of space and time. But I want to tell you that there's another aspect of black holes that I think is quite beautiful. And there's a beauty to them that I really think should be celebrated more and should excite us. Black holes, as one of the first places we now understand they are, is at the core of nearly every galaxy in the universe. Huge objects that are sitting there at the core of the galaxy, not just accidentally, but it seems to be that they are essential to how that galaxy works. Now, you may know that galaxies are essentially, as we understand it, the cradle of life. But galaxies need, it seems, black holes. So in some sense, black holes are intimately related to life in a way which I find quite beautiful.
I really love this idea about being a part of the ocean, Bethanie. Like, is there something that we can learn from that should be able to influence the way we live every day?
Yeah, And I think, that it's cyclical, that phytoplankton bloom, they die, they get recycled, and they're, allow rebirth and new blooms to form, and so we can kind of sit in ease, I think, in some ways, especially if you're like sitting around stressing about, what's tomorrow to bring, just by, hearkening back to that. So I don't know if that's a very good answer. I don't get chances to talk to people who are not scientists very often. So.
And while I was thinking about that, I was thinking about artificial intelligence and ethics.
We see examples in the wild of AI, exhibiting the same biases that are, in our society. It's going to take all of you to, help advocate for, fairness, accountability, and transparency, and as I said in my talk, consent and all those things.
Philip, with that, how do you digitize the Black experience to go against artificial intelligence bias?
Why'd you do this, man?
Simple question, sorry.
I'm actually for biased AI. And here's why I say this. AI needs to be rebiased. You can't give AI the opportunity to allow itself to run and then ask for it to now make better decisions. We're essentially codifying current modes of stratification if we just let that happen. And so if we intentionally rebias AI for what the world that we actually want, then maybe we'll get a different existence.
If we teach artificial intelligence with games that help democratize the future, equitable games, games that speak about liberation, then we have a chance to infuse more African soul and what I call queer soul as well into artificial intelligence. So what we need is a queer AI, an Afro-queer AI, and that's what I'm rooting for.
I am particularly interested in, for example, what happens at the moment those black holes merge. You have two separate black holes merging to form one black hole. That's a profound moment where two become one in some ways. There may be hints in there about what's going on with the black hole horizons, which is where people who, myself, who worry about quantum physics are very interested. So we haven't learned anything new yet, but we may be on the cusp of learning something very new about that area.
Did anybody else get chills when he said when two black holes become one? How, when you get to Psyche, right? Say you all right, you get on Psyche and you go to Psyche. Right? So when you get to Psyche, what are you gonna do?
So we're gonna spend all of our time orbiting Psyche from a pretty high altitude and trying to use our science instruments to take a bunch of data. It's interesting because some people who aren't thinking about, well, it's science for the sake of science, like, well, why? Why are you going? Who cares? Why are you spending all this money doing it? And there's a two-fold answer to that. There's one, when you learn more about the world and what is actually true about the world, you can be super excited because it's things that you might not ever have imagined. We can inspire the younger generation, even if they grow up to be doctors or lawyers or something else that's not space. It really gives you a drive to go out and do something in the world. And so people will say, well, are you going to do something that's going to change something about my life right now, today? Well, no. But it might change something about the future 500 years from now, 1,000 years from now, when we go out and prove what these asteroids are made of. Maybe there will be asteroid mining and civilization is going to expand across the solar system. See what I did there? Expanse is awesome.
Boom. Shout out to the Expanse. Shout out to sci-fi. I don't know about y'all, but I was mind blown. There was several mind-blowing situations that happened this evening. This has been a dream come true for me. When I first started the Afrofuturist Podcast with Lonny, when he and I first got on that 2-hour conversation and we decided to do this thing, I never would imagine I'd be dating all of you. I can't thank you all enough for being here. Good night.